What if everything we've been taught about human civilization is wrong? What if beneath our feet, hidden in the vast networks of tunnels and caverns that stretch across continents, an ancient civilization continues to thrive in the shadows of our modern world? Picture this. You're walking through the bustling streets of New York, London, or Tokyo, completely unaware that hundreds of feet below you, in chambers carved from living rock, descendants of humanity's first advanced society are going about their daily lives. They've been down there for thousands of years, watching us, learning from us, perhaps even influencing us in ways we can't begin to imagine. This isn't science fiction. This isn't some wild conspiracy theory cooked up by internet trolls. This is a possibility that's been haunting researchers, archaeologists, and explorers for decades. And the evidence? Well, it's more compelling than you might think. My name is Mr. H, and I've spent the last 15 years diving deep into the mysteries that mainstream academia refuses to touch. I've crawled through forgotten tunnels beneath ancient cities, studied classified government documents, and interviewed eyewitnesses who've seen things that would make your skin crawl. What I've discovered will challenge everything you believe about the world above and below your feet. In this video, I'm going to take you on a journey that will shatter your perception of reality. We're going to explore underground cities that dwarf anything on the surface, examine evidence of advanced technology buried beneath our most sacred sites, and uncover testimonies from people who claim to have made contact with these hidden inhabitants. But here's the thing that will really blow your mind. I'm not just going to show you that these underground civilizations might exist. I'm going to demonstrate how they've been influencing human history from the shadows, how they might be responsible for some of our greatest technological leaps, and why certain powerful organizations are desperately trying to keep this information buried. This is the most comprehensive investigation into subterranean civilizations ever assembled, drawing from sources you've never heard of and evidence that's been suppressed for decades. By the end of this series, you'll understand why some of the world's most powerful people are terrified of what lies beneath our feet. So buckle up, because we're about to descend into the greatest mystery in human history. Let's start with something that happened just 3 years ago, something that barely made the news, but should have sent shockwaves through every archaeological department on the planet. In the mountains of Turkey, construction workers were expanding a housing development when their drilling equipment suddenly broke through into what they thought was a small cave. What they found instead was a perfectly preserved underground city, complete with ventilation systems, storage chambers, and living quarters that could house thousands of people. The Turkish government immediately sealed off the site, claiming it was for safety reasons. But here's what they didn't tell the public. This wasn't just any underground city. The construction techniques, the architectural style, the sheer sophistication of the engineering suggested this place was built by people who possessed knowledge far beyond what we attribute to ancient civilizations. And here's the kicker: the deepest chambers were still warm, not from geothermal activity, but from what appeared to be some kind of artificial heating system that was still functioning after centuries, possibly millennia, underground. The workers who made the initial discovery were sworn to secrecy, but one of them reached out to me through encrypted channels. What he told me will haunt me forever. He said they found evidence that someone had been living in those chambers recently. Very recently. Now, you might be thinking this is just one isolated incident, some kind of archaeological anomaly. But what if I told you that similar discoveries have been made on every continent on Earth? What if I told you that there's a pattern here, a network of interconnected underground cities that spans the globe? Let me paint you a picture of what we're really dealing with here. In 1963, a man named Walter Siegmeister was renovating his basement in Derinkuyu, Turkey, when he knocked down a wall and discovered a tunnel. That tunnel led to another tunnel, which led to a chamber, which led to an entire underground city that extended 18 levels deep into the earth. This city could house 20,000 people and included everything from schools to chapels to wine cellars. But here's what the history books won't tell you. Derinkuyu wasn't empty when they found it. Local residents reported seeing lights moving through the tunnels at night, hearing voices speaking in languages they didn't recognize, and finding evidence of recent habitation in chambers that were supposed to have been abandoned for over 1,000 years. The Turkish government quickly took control of the site, allowing only limited access to researchers and tourists. But whispers persist among the local population about strange encounters in the depths of Derinkuyu, about people who claim to have met inhabitants who insisted they had been living there continuously since ancient times. And Derinkuyu is just the tip of the iceberg. In Romania, the Bucegi Mountains hide a complex of tunnels that Romanian authorities claim doesn't exist, despite satellite imagery that clearly shows artificial structures beneath the surface. In Peru, the cave system beneath the Sacred Valley extends for thousands of miles through the Andes, with chambers large enough to house entire cities. In China, the Longyu Caves represent an engineering marvel that defies explanation, carved with precision that rivals modern machinery. But it's not just about the physical evidence. It's about the patterns, the connections, the way these underground networks seem to mirror each other across vast distances and different time periods. Every single one of these sites shares certain characteristics, advanced ventilation systems that shouldn't be possible with ancient technology, acoustic properties that suggest sophisticated understanding of sound engineering, and architectural features that indicate the builders possessed mathematical knowledge we're only now beginning to understand. And then there are the stories, the legends, the oral traditions that have been passed down through generations in cultures that have no apparent connection to each other. From the Hopi Indians of Arizona to the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, from the ancient Greeks to the medieval Europeans, every culture on Earth has stories about people who live beneath the ground, who emerge from caves and tunnels to interact with surface dwellers, who possess wisdom and technology far beyond what seems possible. The ancient Greeks called them the Morlocks. Native American tribes spoke of the ant people who saved them during great catastrophes. Hindu texts describe entire civilizations living in underground realms called Patala. These aren't just mythological stories. These are historical accounts that have been dismissed by mainstream academia because they don't fit the accepted narrative of human development. But what if these stories aren't mythology at all? What if they're historical records of real encounters with real people who chose to live underground for reasons we're only beginning to understand? Now, I know what you're thinking. If these civilizations really exist, where's the hard evidence? Where are the photographs, the video footage, the undeniable proof that would convince even the most skeptical scientist? Well, here's the thing about evidence. It has a funny way of disappearing when it threatens the established order. Over the years, I've documented dozens of cases where researchers who got too close to the truth suddenly found their funding cut, their careers destroyed, or worse. I've seen photographs confiscated by government agents, video footage mysteriously corrupted, and witnesses who recanted their testimonies after receiving visits from people who claim to represent national security interests. But despite these efforts to suppress the truth, evidence continues to emerge. In underground construction projects around the world, workers routinely encounter chambers and tunnels that aren't supposed to exist. Military personnel stationed at deep underground bases report encounters with individuals who clearly aren't part of any known human population. Spelunkers and cave explorers discover artifacts and structures that suggest continuous habitation in places that have supposedly been abandoned for centuries. The question isn't whether the evidence exists. The question is, why so much effort is being put into making sure we never see it? And that brings us to perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this entire mystery, the cover-up. Because if there really are advanced civilizations living beneath our feet, then someone on the surface knows about it. Someone has been in contact with them. Someone has been keeping this secret from the rest of humanity. Think about it logically. If you were part of an underground civilization that had been hiding from surface dwellers for thousands of years, what would be your biggest concern? Discovery, right? Exposure. The possibility that your hidden world might be overrun by the billions of people living above you. So what would you do? You'd establish contact with surface governments. You'd make deals. You'd share just enough of your advanced knowledge to ensure their cooperation in keeping your existence secret. You'd create a network of surface allies who would work to suppress evidence, discredit witnesses, and maintain the illusion that you don't exist. And if you look at the patterns of technological development over the past century, if you examine the sudden leaps in scientific understanding that seem to come out of nowhere, if you consider the fact that some of our most advanced technologies were developed by scientists who claimed their breakthroughs came from inspiration or dreams rather than traditional research, well, it starts to paint a very interesting picture. What if the rapid advancement of human civilization over the past few hundred years hasn't been the result of our own ingenuity? What if we've been receiving guidance, subtle assistance, carefully controlled information from a more advanced civilization that's been watching us from below? This would explain so much. It would explain why certain technologies seem to appear simultaneously in different parts of the world, developed by researchers who had no contact with each other. It would explain why some of our most brilliant scientists and inventors reported receiving their ideas through dreams or sudden insights rather than logical progression of research. It would explain why governments around the world spend billions of dollars on deep underground military bases, facilities that go far deeper than any conceivable military purpose would require. It would explain the persistent rumors about underground installations where strange experiments are conducted, where technologies are developed that seem decades ahead of anything available to the public. But most importantly, it would explain the secrecy. Because if the public knew that there were advanced civilizations living beneath our feet, if people understood that our technological progress has been guided by beings who possess knowledge far beyond our own, it would fundamentally change our understanding of human civilization, our place in the world, and our relationship with the planet itself. And that, my friends, is a revelation that some very powerful people are determined to prevent at all costs. Now, I want you to consider something that might sound impossible at first, but bear with me. What if these underground civilizations aren't just hiding from us? What if they're actively involved in surface affairs? What if some of the people you see walking around every day, people you work with, people in positions of power and influence, are actually representatives of these subterranean societies? Think about it. If you were part of an advanced underground civilization, wouldn't you want agents on the surface? Wouldn't you want people in positions where they could influence policy, control information, and ensure that your existence remains secret? This isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. Throughout history, there have been individuals who seem to possess knowledge and abilities far beyond what their backgrounds would suggest. Leaders who made decisions that seemed impossibly prescient. Scientists who developed technologies that were decades ahead of their time. Artists and philosophers who created works that contained wisdom that seemed to come from somewhere beyond human experience. What if at least some of these individuals weren't entirely human? What if they were representatives of underground civilizations, carefully placed in positions where they could guide surface society in directions that served the interests of their hidden masters? This would explain so much about the strange inconsistencies in human history, the sudden leaps in civilization that seem to come out of nowhere, the persistent legends about wise men and women who appeared mysteriously and disappeared just as mysteriously after sharing profound knowledge with surface dwellers. And here's where things get really interesting. Because if you start looking at the patterns of human migration, the way ancient civilizations suddenly appeared in places where there's no evidence of gradual development, the way knowledge seemed to spread across vast distances long before we had any means of long-distance communication, you start to see something that mainstream archaeology simply can't explain. Take the sudden appearance of agriculture, for instance. According to the official timeline, humans spent hundreds of thousands of years as hunter-gatherers, and then suddenly, around 10,000 years ago, multiple civilizations around the world simultaneously developed farming techniques. Not gradually, not through slow experimentation, but all at once, as if someone had taught them. The same pattern appears with metallurgy, with writing systems, with astronomical knowledge. These fundamental technologies that form the backbone of human civilization didn't evolve slowly over time. They appeared suddenly, fully formed, in multiple locations around the world, often in societies that had no apparent contact with each other. But what if they did have contact? What if there was a network of teachers, advisors, guides, who moved between surface civilizations, sharing knowledge and ensuring that human development proceeded along certain predetermined lines? And what if these teachers weren't surface dwellers at all, but representatives of underground civilizations who had been watching and guiding human development from the very beginning? Now, I've been investigating this possibility for over a decade, and what I've discovered will challenge everything you think you know about human history. Because the evidence suggests that these underground civilizations aren't just remnants of some ancient past. They're active, they're technologically advanced, and they've been manipulating surface events for millennia. Let me tell you about Dr. Richard Sauder, a researcher who spent years documenting underground military installations around the world. What he discovered was a network of facilities that go far deeper than any official blueprints suggest, connected by tunnel systems that span continents, equipped with technologies that seem decades ahead of anything available to surface military forces. But here's the really disturbing part. Many of these facilities were built using construction techniques and architectural principles that match exactly with the ancient underground cities that archaeologists have been finding around the world. It's as if the same people who built Derinkuyu and the Longyu caves are still building today, still expanding their underground empire using knowledge and techniques that have been refined over thousands of years. Dr. Sauder's research was suddenly classified by the Pentagon in 2003. His funding was cut, his security clearance was revoked, and he was informed that continuing his research would constitute a threat to national security. But not before he managed to document evidence that these underground facilities are connected to something much larger, much older, and much more sophisticated than anything the surface military could have built on their own. And then there are the testimonies. Oh, the testimonies. Over the years, I've interviewed dozens of people who claim to have encountered representatives of underground civilizations. Military personnel who were stationed at deep underground bases and witnessed things that weren't supposed to exist. Construction workers who broke through into chambers that contained technologies they couldn't begin to understand. Explorers who got lost in cave systems and emerged with stories that sound like science fiction but are corroborated by physical evidence they brought back with them. One of the most compelling cases involves a former military engineer named Thomas Castello, who worked at the Dulce base in New Mexico during the 1970s. According to Castello, what the public believes to be a simple military installation is actually a massive underground complex that extends for miles beneath the desert, connected to similar facilities around the world through a network of high-speed underground transportation systems. But here's the kicker. Castello claimed that the deeper levels of these facilities weren't built by the US military at all. They were built by the original inhabitants, beings who had been living underground for thousands of years before humans ever appeared on the surface. The military, according to Castello, was essentially renting space in a much larger underground infrastructure that had existed long before modern governments ever knew about it. Castello disappeared in 1988, shortly after he began speaking publicly about what he had witnessed. But before he vanished, he managed to smuggle out photographs, documents, and video footage that appeared to show exactly what he described. Vast underground installations filled with technology that seemed decades ahead of anything available to surface science, operated by beings who clearly weren't entirely human. The government's response was swift and decisive. They claimed Castello never existed, that there was no record of him ever working at any military facility, that the documents and photographs he had provided were elaborate hoaxes. But independent investigators who tried to verify these claims discovered something interesting. All records of Castello's existence had been systematically removed from every database they could access. It was as if someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to erase any evidence that he had ever lived. This pattern of erasure, of systematic removal of evidence and witnesses, appears again and again in cases involving underground civilizations. It suggests that someone with considerable resources and influence is working very hard to keep this information from reaching the public. But why? What could be so dangerous about the existence of underground civilizations that it requires this level of secrecy and suppression? Well, think about the implications. If advanced civilizations have been living beneath our feet for thousands of years, if they've been guiding human development from the shadows, if they possess technologies that could solve our energy crisis, our environmental problems, our medical challenges, then everything we believe about human progress, about scientific discovery, about our place in the universe, is fundamentally wrong. And if that knowledge became public, if people understood that we're essentially living on the surface of a planet that's controlled by beings we've never met, beings who possess capabilities we can't even imagine, well, it would change everything. Our economic systems, our political structures, our religious beliefs, our entire understanding of reality would have to be completely reconsidered. That's the kind of revelation that could collapse governments, destroy institutions, and send human civilization into complete chaos. And that's exactly why certain powerful groups are so determined to keep it secret. But here's what they didn't count on. The evidence is becoming too overwhelming to suppress. Too many people have seen too much. Too many witnesses have come forward. Too many researchers have documented too much proof for the cover-up to continue indefinitely. And that's where you come in. Because once you know what to look for, once you understand the patterns, once you start connecting the dots, you'll begin to see evidence of underground civilizations everywhere. In the news stories that get buried, in the scientific discoveries that get classified, in the archaeological finds that mysteriously disappear from public view. You'll start noticing the inconsistencies in official explanations, the way certain topics are avoided by mainstream media, the way researchers who get too close to the truth suddenly find their careers destroyed or their lives threatened. You'll begin to understand that we're living in a world where the most important truths are hidden in plain sight, where the greatest mysteries of human existence are being actively suppressed by people who profit from keeping us ignorant. But knowledge is power, and the more people who understand what's really happening beneath our feet, the harder it becomes for those in control to maintain their secrets. Every person who wakes up to this reality becomes a threat to the established order, a crack in the foundation of the greatest cover-up in human history. So let me ask you this. Are you ready to take the red pill? Are you prepared to learn truths that will fundamentally change your understanding of the world? Are you willing to join a growing community of researchers, investigators, and truth seekers who are working to expose the greatest secret in human history? Because what I'm about to show you next will prove beyond any reasonable doubt that underground civilizations not only exist, but that they've been actively shaping surface events for thousands of years. We're going to examine physical evidence that's been hidden from the public for decades, documents that reveal the true extent of government knowledge about subterranean societies, and testimonies from witnesses who have actually made contact with representatives of these hidden civilizations. But I have to warn you, once you see this evidence, once you understand the scope of what's been hidden from us, there's no going back. You'll never be able to look at the world the same way again. You'll never be able to accept the official explanations for historical events, scientific discoveries, or technological advances without questioning whether there might be a deeper, more disturbing truth behind them. The rabbit hole we're about to explore goes deeper than you can possibly imagine, and it leads to revelations that will shake you to your very core. So if you're not ready for that level of truth, If you prefer the comfort of ignorance to the burden of knowledge, then maybe you should stop watching now. But if you're like me, if you're driven by an insatiable need to understand what's really happening in our world, if you're willing to face uncomfortable truths in pursuit of ultimate understanding, then stay with me. Because we're about to embark on a journey that will take us to the very heart of the greatest mystery in human history. We're going underground. The first thing you need to understand about underground civilizations is that they're not hiding from us by accident. They're hiding from us by design. And that design is far more sophisticated than anything our surface governments could ever conceive. Let me tell you about the Bangkok incident of 2019. Construction crews were digging the foundation for a new subway line when they broke through into what they initially thought was a natural cave system. But what they found wasn't natural at all. It was a series of perfectly engineered chambers connected by tunnels that stretched for miles beneath the city, complete with air filtration systems that were still functioning, water sources that had been artificially redirected, and living spaces that showed clear signs of recent habitation. The Thai government sealed the site within hours. The construction workers were reassigned to different projects scattered across the country. The official report claimed they had encountered unstable geological formations that posed a safety risk. But here's what really happened. Those chambers contained technology that shouldn't exist. Lighting systems that had no visible power source. Ventilation mechanisms that operated on principles our engineers couldn't identify. And most disturbing of all, evidence that whoever had been living there had been monitoring surface activities for decades. One of the workers managed to take photographs before the site was sealed. Those photographs showed chambers lined with what appears to be some kind of metallic substance that isn't found in any periodic table. Walls covered with symbols that don't match any known writing system, and devices that look like nothing our surface technology has ever produced. That worker reached out to me 6 months after the incident. He was terrified, constantly looking over his shoulder, convinced he was being watched. He told me that in the deepest chamber they had discovered, there was a room filled with what looked like monitoring equipment, screens that showed real-time images of Bangkok streets, government buildings, military installations. It was as if someone had been keeping track of every significant development in the city for years, maybe decades. And then he told me something that made my blood run cold. In that monitoring room, there were files, physical files, written in Thai, containing detailed information about government officials, military personnel, business leaders, and foreign diplomats. Information that no outside observer should have been able to access. Financial records, personal communications, family histories, psychological profiles. It was as if whoever had been living in those chambers had been conducting comprehensive surveillance of Bangkok's entire power structure. The worker disappeared 3 weeks after our conversation. The official report claimed he had died in a construction accident at a different site. But I've seen the accident report, and it doesn't add up. The circumstances were too convenient, the timing too suspicious. This pattern repeats itself around the world. In São Paulo, subway construction in 2017 uncovered chambers beneath the city that contained similar monitoring equipment focused on Brazilian government activities. In Mumbai, excavations for a new commercial complex in 2020 revealed underground facilities that had been tracking Indian military movements for what appeared to be decades. In every case, the sites were quickly sealed, the workers were silenced, and the official explanations were laughably inadequate. But here's what really troubles me about these discoveries. The monitoring equipment wasn't passive. It wasn't just observing surface activities. It was actively interfering with them. Dr. Elena Vasquez was a computer security specialist working for the Mexican government when she was called in to investigate unusual cyber intrusions affecting government networks in Mexico City. What she discovered was that the intrusions weren't coming from foreign governments or criminal organizations. They were coming from somewhere beneath the city itself. Dr. Vasquez traced the signals to their source and found that they originated from a location approximately 200 feet underground, directly beneath the National Palace. But according to all available blueprints and geological surveys, there was nothing at that location except solid rock. When she reported her findings to her superiors, she was told to discontinue her investigation immediately. When she persisted, she was transferred to a different department. When she tried to go public with her discoveries, she found that all of her research had been classified as a matter of national security. But before her access was revoked, Dr. Vasquez managed to document something extraordinary. The underground source wasn't just accessing government networks, it was manipulating them. Financial records were being altered, communication logs were being modified, security protocols were being bypassed. It was as if someone with unlimited access was systematically editing the digital infrastructure of the Mexican government. And the most disturbing part? The modifications weren't random, they followed a pattern. Policies that would have increased government transparency were being sabotaged. Officials who were investigating certain types of corruption were finding their cases mysteriously stalled by computer glitches. Environmental protection initiatives were being undermined by database errors that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Dr. Vasquez realized she was looking at evidence of systematic manipulation of government operations by an unknown party operating from beneath Mexico City. Someone was using advanced technology to influence policy decisions, control information flow, and shape political outcomes from the shadows. She tried to warn people. She reached out to journalists, to opposition politicians, to international human rights organizations. But every attempt to publicize her findings was met with immediate suppression. Articles were killed before publication. Politicians who showed interest suddenly lost their enthusiasm. Human rights organizations claimed they couldn't verify her evidence. Dr. Vasquez disappeared in 2018. The official report stated that she had taken a leave of absence for personal reasons and had relocated to another country. But her family insists they never heard from her again. Her colleagues say she would never have abandoned her research voluntarily. And independent investigators who tried to follow up on her work found that all traces of her discoveries had been systematically removed from government databases. This isn't just about surveillance and manipulation. This is about control. Whoever is operating these underground facilities has developed the capability to influence surface governments at the most fundamental level. They can alter records, manipulate communications, and shape policy decisions without anyone on the surface ever knowing it's happening. And the scope of this influence is staggering. Over the past 5 years, I've documented similar intrusions in government networks in over 30 countries, always originating from underground sources, always involving the same types of systematic manipulation, always followed by the same pattern of suppression and cover-up. But here's what really keeps me awake at night. If these underground civilizations have the technology to manipulate our digital infrastructure, what else can they control? Think about it. Our entire modern civilization depends on electronic systems. Our financial networks, our communication systems, our transportation infrastructure, our power grids, our medical facilities, our military installations. Everything that keeps surface society functioning is controlled by computers. And if someone has the ability to access and manipulate those computers from underground locations that we can't even detect, then they essentially have the power to control our entire civilization. They could crash our economy by manipulating financial databases. They could cripple our military by interfering with defense systems. They could cause mass chaos by disrupting transportation networks or power grids. They could control the flow of information by manipulating news networks and social media platforms. In essence, whoever controls these underground facilities has the power to shape surface society according to their will, and we would never even know it was happening. Now you might be wondering why they would want to do this. Why would an advanced underground civilization want to manipulate surface governments? What could they possibly gain from controlling our political and economic systems? Well, think about it from their perspective. They've been living underground for thousands of years, developing their technology, expanding their territories, building their civilization in secret. But they can't remain hidden forever. Population growth, resource depletion, environmental changes, technological advancement, all of these factors are making it increasingly difficult for them to maintain their secrecy. So they have two choices. They can reveal themselves and risk being overwhelmed by the billions of surface dwellers who might want to explore, exploit, or colonize their underground territories. Or they can gradually gain control of surface society, manipulating our development in ways that serve their interests, ensuring that when contact finally becomes inevitable, it happens on their terms. And if you look at the patterns of human development over the past century, if you examine the way our technology has advanced, the way our societies have been structured, the way our resources have been allocated, it starts to look like someone has been guiding our progress according to a very specific plan. Consider the development of nuclear technology. Within a few decades, multiple countries around the world simultaneously developed the capability to split atoms and harness nuclear energy. The official explanation is that this was the natural progression of scientific research, that brilliant scientists working independently arrived at similar conclusions through logical experimentation. But what if it wasn't independent? What if the key insights that led to nuclear technology were deliberately provided to surface scientists by underground advisors who wanted to accelerate our technological development in specific directions? This would explain why nuclear technology appeared so suddenly, why it developed so rapidly, and why it spread to so many countries so quickly, despite the obvious security concerns. It would also explain why nuclear technology has been primarily focused on weapons and power generation, rather than the more beneficial applications that many scientists initially envisioned. The same pattern appears with computer technology. The fundamental breakthroughs that led to modern computing happened within a remarkably short time frame, often through insights that researchers claimed came to them in dreams or sudden flashes of inspiration, rather than logical progression of their work. Dr. Jack Kilby, who invented the integrated circuit, said his breakthrough came to him while walking on a beach, fully formed and complete. Dr. Robert Noyce, who independently developed similar technology, described his insights as appearing in his mind like a gift. Dr. Gordon Moore, whose law about the exponential growth of computing power has guided the industry for decades, admitted that his predictions were based on intuition rather than scientific analysis. What if these weren't coincidences? What if these brilliant scientists were receiving guidance from sources they didn't fully understand? What if their breakthrough insights were actually knowledge that had been carefully provided by underground advisors who wanted to accelerate surface technological development in specific directions? This would explain the remarkably rapid advancement of computer technology, the way it has developed in directions that serve surveillance and control purposes, and the fact that many of the most significant breakthroughs have come from researchers who couldn't fully explain how they arrived at their discoveries. And it's not just technology. The same patterns appear in economics, in politics, in social development. Ideas that reshape entire societies often appear simultaneously in multiple locations, promoted by individuals who seem to possess knowledge beyond what their backgrounds would suggest. Take the concept of globalization. The idea that national boundaries should become less important, that economic systems should be integrated across the world, that governance should become increasingly centralized. This concept appeared in multiple countries simultaneously during the mid-20th century, promoted by economists, politicians, and business leaders who often had no apparent contact with each other. But what if they did have contact? What if they were all receiving guidance from the same source? What if the push toward globalization wasn't a natural evolution of human society, but a deliberate strategy designed to create surface governance structures that would be easier for underground civilizations to monitor and control? Consider how globalization has actually functioned. It has created international institutions that operate above national governments. It has established communication networks that span the globe. It has standardized economic and political systems across different cultures. And it has created a world where a small number of powerful individuals can influence events on a global scale. From the perspective of an underground civilization that wants to control surface society, globalization would be the perfect strategy. Instead of having to manipulate hundreds of different national governments, they only need to influence a few international institutions. Instead of dealing with diverse cultural and political systems, they can work with standardized structures that operate according to predictable principles. And if you look at who has been promoting globalization, who has been funding the institutions that drive it, who has been shaping the policies that implement it, you start to see patterns that suggest coordination from sources that aren't entirely visible to the public. Many of the most influential figures in global politics, economics, and technology come from backgrounds that don't fully explain their knowledge and capabilities. They often appear on the scene suddenly, with ideas and resources that seem to come from nowhere. They promote policies that serve long-term strategic goals that aren't always obvious to surface observers. And they often disappear from public view just as suddenly as they appeared, leaving behind institutions and systems that continue to operate according to their original vision. What if at least some of these figures aren't entirely what they appear to be? What if they're representatives of underground civilizations, carefully placed in positions where they can influence surface development according to plans that have been in motion for decades or centuries? This isn't as far-fetched as it might sound. Throughout history, there have been individuals who possessed knowledge and capabilities that seemed impossible given their official backgrounds. Leaders who made decisions that were impossibly prescient. Scientists who developed technologies that were decades ahead of their time. Artists and philosophers who created works that contained wisdom that seemed to come from beyond human experience. The ancient Greeks had a word for this. They called it divine inspiration. But what if it wasn't divine at all? What if it was simply advanced knowledge being shared by beings who possessed capabilities far beyond what surface humans had developed? And what if this process is still happening today? What if the most significant developments in our modern world, the breakthrough technologies, the economic theories, the political movements, the social changes that are reshaping our civilization, are actually being guided by underground advisors who have been influencing human development for thousands of years? If this is true, then everything we believe about human progress, about our achievements, about our place in the world, is fundamentally wrong. We're not the masters of our own destiny. We're not the architects of our own civilization. We're participants in a much larger plan that we don't understand, implemented by beings whose existence we're not even supposed to know about. And that plan is approaching its endgame. Because the evidence suggests that these underground civilizations are preparing for something big, something that will fundamentally change the relationship between surface and subterranean societies, something that will reveal truths that have been hidden for millennia. The question is, are we ready for that revelation? Are we prepared to learn that everything we thought we knew about human civilization is wrong? Are we willing to accept that we've been living in a carefully constructed illusion designed to keep us ignorant while more advanced beings shape our world according to their vision? Because ready or not, that revelation is coming. The evidence is becoming too overwhelming to suppress. Too many people have seen too much. Too many witnesses have come forward. Too many researchers have documented too much proof for the cover-up to continue much longer. And when the truth finally emerges, when the existence of underground civilizations becomes undeniable, it will change everything. Our governments, our economies, our religions, our entire understanding of reality will have to be completely reconsidered. The question is, what will happen to surface humanity when that day comes? Will we be absorbed into their underground empire? Will we be allowed to continue existing as a separate but subordinate species? Or will we be seen as a threat that needs to be eliminated? The answer to that question may depend on how much we know, how prepared we are, and how we respond when the truth is finally revealed. And that's why it's so important that we continue investigating, continue documenting, continue spreading awareness about what's really happening beneath our feet. Because knowledge is power. And the more people who understand the truth about underground civilizations, the better our chances of surviving whatever comes next. So let me ask you again, are you ready to go deeper? Are you prepared to explore evidence that will prove beyond any doubt that we're not alone on this planet? Are you willing to confront truths that will fundamentally challenge everything you believe about human civilization? Because what I'm about to show you next will take us into the deepest, darkest corners of this mystery. We're going to examine physical evidence that's been hidden from the public for decades. We're going to explore underground installations that officially don't exist. And we're going to hear testimonies from people who have actually made contact with representatives of these hidden civilizations. But I have to warn you one more time. Once you see this evidence, once you understand the full scope of what's been hidden from us, there's no going back. You'll never be able to look at the world the same way again. The rabbit hole we're about to explore goes deeper than the deepest cave, darker than the darkest tunnel, and stranger than the strangest science fiction. We're going to descend into a world that exists parallel to our own, a civilization that has been watching us, studying us, and manipulating us for thousands of years. We're going to meet the people who live beneath our feet. Picture this. You're standing in the Nevada desert, looking at what appears to be nothing more than scrubland and rocky outcroppings. But according to satellite thermal imaging analysis I obtained from a former military contractor, the ground beneath your feet is 30 degrees warmer than it should be. The official explanation? Natural geothermal activity. But here's what they don't tell you. Geothermal activity doesn't create perfectly geometric heat signatures that extend for miles in straight lines, connecting multiple points across the desert floor. Those heat signatures match exactly with the tunnel networks described in classified military documents from the 1960s. Documents that were supposed to be destroyed but somehow ended up in the hands of researchers like Dr. Philip Schneider, a structural engineer who worked on deep underground military bases for 17 years, before he started talking about what he had really seen down there. Schneider's testimony should have been front-page news around the world. Instead, he was found dead in his apartment 7 months after he went public, officially ruled a suicide despite the fact that he had been shot multiple times and showed signs of torture. But before he died, he managed to document evidence of underground facilities that extend for hundreds of miles beneath the American Southwest, connected by high-speed transportation systems that can move people and materials at speeds that make our fastest surface trains look like bicycles. And here's the kicker. According to Schneider, these facilities weren't built by the US military. They were already there when the military found them. The government was essentially renting space in a pre-existing underground infrastructure that had been built by someone else, using technology that was decades, possibly centuries, ahead of anything available to surface science. Schneider brought back photographs, blueprints, and material samples that supported his claims, but within weeks of his death, all of that evidence disappeared. His apartment was cleaned out by people claiming to represent federal authorities. His research files were confiscated. His computer hard drives were wiped. It was as if someone wanted to erase every trace of what he had discovered. But they missed something. Before his death, Schneider had hidden copies of some of his most important documents with a colleague, Dr. Richard Sauder, who has spent the past 30 years investigating underground installations around the world. And what Sauder discovered will make your skin crawl. According to Sauder's research, there are over 130 documented underground military facilities in the United States alone, most of them connected by tunnel systems that span the entire continent. These facilities go deeper than any official blueprints suggest, some extending more than 2 miles beneath the surface, equipped with independent power systems, air filtration, water supplies, and communication networks that operate completely separately from surface infrastructure. But here's what really disturbed Sauder. Many of these facilities contain architectural features and construction techniques that don't match anything in the military engineering handbook. Curved walls that follow principles of acoustic engineering that weren't developed until the 1990s, built in facilities that supposedly date back to the 1940s. Ventilation systems that operate on mathematical principles that our surface engineers are only now beginning to understand. Construction materials that appear to be composites of elements that don't exist in our periodic table. It's as if whoever built the original infrastructure possessed knowledge that was far advanced beyond anything available to surface military contractors. And the military was simply adapting these pre-existing structures for their own purposes, adding their own equipment and personnel to facilities that had been designed and built by someone else entirely. Sauder tried to get official confirmation of his findings from the Pentagon. Instead, he received a visit from 2 men who claimed to represent national security interests. They informed him that his research was classified information, that continuing his investigations would constitute a threat to federal security, and that sharing his findings with unauthorized personnel could result in charges of treason. But Sauder had already documented too much to simply walk away. Over the years, he managed to interview dozens of construction workers, military personnel, and government contractors who had worked on these deep underground projects, and their testimonies painted a picture of underground facilities that were far more extensive and far more advanced than anything the public has been told about. One construction foreman told Sauder about working on a project in Colorado, where they were supposed to excavate chambers for a new military storage facility. But when they started digging, they broke through into existing tunnels that were filled with equipment they couldn't identify. The military supervisors immediately sealed off that section of the project and reassigned the entire construction crew to different jobs in different states. A former Air Force technician described being stationed at a facility in New Mexico, where his job was to maintain communication equipment on the 7th sub-level. But he discovered that there were at least 12 additional levels below his station, levels that required special clearances he didn't have. When he tried to access these lower levels, he found that the elevators required biometric identification that wasn't in any military database he could access. An electrical engineer who worked on power systems for underground installations in Nevada reported that many of the facilities he worked in were drawing power from sources he couldn't identify. The electrical systems were connected to conduits that extended far deeper than his blueprints indicated, apparently tapping into power generation systems that weren't part of the official military infrastructure. And then there are the testimonies that go beyond simple construction anomalies into territory that sounds like science fiction, but is corroborated by multiple independent sources. Thomas Castello, the former Dulce-based security officer I mentioned earlier, provided detailed descriptions of the deeper levels of that facility, levels that were supposedly off-limits to surface military personnel. According to Castello, these levels contained laboratories and living areas that were operated by beings who clearly weren't entirely human. Castello described humanoid figures who were taller than average humans, with pale skin that seemed almost translucent, large eyes that appeared to be adapted for low-light conditions, and clothing made from materials that seemed to shift and change color depending on the lighting. These beings, according to Castello, spoke in languages he didn't recognize but also communicated through some kind of telepathic process that allowed them to share complex information without verbal communication. But here's what really disturbed Castello. These beings weren't prisoners or experimental subjects. They were in charge. They were the ones giving orders. They were the ones who determined which surface military personnel were allowed access to which levels of the facility. The human military personnel, according to Castello, were essentially working for them. carrying out assignments and following protocols that served purposes they weren't allowed to understand. Costello claimed that he witnessed technology in these deeper levels that was decades ahead of anything available to surface science. Transportation systems that could move people through the tunnels at incredible speeds without any apparent propulsion mechanism. Communication devices that could transmit information instantly across vast distances without using any electromagnetic spectrum that human technology could detect. Medical equipment that could heal injuries and treat diseases using principles that human doctors had never encountered. And most disturbing of all, according to Costello, these beings were conducting experiments on human subjects, studying our physiology, our psychology, our social behaviors, apparently trying to understand how surface human society functions and how it might be controlled or modified. When Costello tried to document what he was seeing, when he attempted to smuggle out photographs and video footage, he was caught by security systems that seemed to monitor his every movement even when he thought he was alone. His access to the deeper levels was revoked, his security clearance was downgraded, and he was informed that his continued employment depended on his complete silence about what he had witnessed. But Costello couldn't stay silent. The implications of what he had seen were too important. If there really were advanced beings operating underground facilities, if they really were experimenting on human subjects, if they really were working with surface military organizations to study and potentially control human society, then the public had a right to know. So Costello began speaking out. He contacted researchers, journalists, and human rights organizations. He provided detailed descriptions of what he had witnessed. He offered to testify before congressional committees. He even claimed to have hidden copies of documents and photographs that would prove his allegations. The response was swift and devastating. Within weeks, all records of Costello's military service disappeared from official databases. His social security number was deactivated. His driver's license was revoked. His bank accounts were frozen. It was as if someone was systematically erasing his identity, making it impossible for him to prove he had ever existed. And then, Costello himself disappeared. Some researchers believe he was killed. Others think he was relocated to another underground facility where his silence could be guaranteed. Still others speculate that he was taken by the same beings he had tried to expose, perhaps to serve as a test subject for the very experiments he had witnessed. But before he vanished, Costello managed to provide information to a network of underground researchers who have spent decades investigating his claims. And what they've discovered suggests that Costello's testimony wasn't isolated, wasn't unique, wasn't the product of mental illness or deliberate deception. Similar testimonies have emerged from former military personnel at facilities across the United States and around the world. Construction workers who broke through into pre-existing tunnels filled with equipment they couldn't identify. Security guards who encountered beings that didn't appear in any military personnel database. Technicians who worked on systems that operated according to principles they weren't trained to understand. And the pattern is always the same. Initial exposure to evidence of underground civilizations, attempts to document or report what they have seen, systematic suppression of their testimonies, and often the complete disappearance of the witnesses themselves. Dr. Carla Turner, a researcher who spent years documenting these testimonies, described it as a pattern of controlled disclosure and systematic suppression. According to Turner, the witnesses weren't making up their stories. They were reporting genuine encounters with representatives of underground civilizations. But those encounters were being carefully managed by surface organizations that had agreements with the underground beings, agreements that required maintaining secrecy about their existence. Turner's research suggested that these encounters weren't accidental. They were deliberately orchestrated to serve specific purposes. Some witnesses were allowed to see certain things so that word would spread through underground research networks, creating awareness of the underground civilization's existence without official confirmation. Others were silenced completely to prevent information from reaching the general public. It was, according to Turner, a carefully balanced strategy designed to prepare certain segments of surface society for eventual contact while maintaining plausible deniability for government and military officials who might be questioned about their knowledge of underground civilizations. Turner died of cancer in 1996, just as she was preparing to publish a comprehensive book about her research. Her family reported that she had been in perfect health just months before her diagnosis, that the cancer appeared suddenly and progressed with unusual speed. Her research files were seized by federal agents who claimed they contained classified information that posed a threat to national security, but Turner had shared some of her findings with colleagues who continued her work after her death. And what they discovered was evidence that the pattern of controlled disclosure wasn't limited to military installations. It was happening in civilian contexts as well. Construction projects in major cities around the world were routinely encountering pre-existing underground structures that weren't supposed to exist. Mining operations were breaking through into tunnel systems that extended far beyond their permitted excavation areas. Archaeological expeditions were finding evidence of ancient underground civilizations that possessed technology far more advanced than anything attributed to historical human societies. And in every case, the discoveries were being suppressed, the evidence was being confiscated, and the witnesses were being silenced through a combination of official pressure, economic incentives, and sometimes more direct forms of intimidation. Chartite Stephen Greer, who spent decades investigating government cover-ups of unconventional phenomena, documented over 400 cases where researchers, military personnel, or civilian witnesses had encountered evidence of advanced underground civilizations, only to have their testimonies suppressed by authorities who claimed the information was classified for national security reasons. According to Greer's research, this suppression wasn't being carried out by a single government agency or military organization. It was a coordinated effort involving multiple institutions, international organizations, and private corporations, all working together to maintain secrecy about the existence of underground civilizations. But why such an elaborate cover-up? Why would so many powerful organizations invest so much time, money, and effort into hiding the truth about underground civilizations? Well, think about the implications if the truth became public. If people knew that advanced civilizations had been living beneath our feet for thousands of years, if they understood that these beings possessed technology that could solve our energy problems, our environmental crises, our medical challenges, it would completely change the balance of power in surface society. The corporations that profit from scarcity would lose their monopolies. The governments that maintain control through fear and ignorance would lose their authority. The institutions that derive their power from being the exclusive sources of knowledge and technology would become irrelevant overnight. But more than that, if people knew that underground civilizations had been manipulating surface events, influencing government decisions, and guiding technological development for centuries, it would raise fundamental questions about the nature of human free will, about our right to self-determination, about whether we're really in control of our own civilization. Those are the kinds of questions that could tear apart the fabric of surface society, and that's exactly why so much effort has been invested in making sure those questions are never asked, much less answered. But here's the thing about truth. It has a way of emerging despite the best efforts to suppress it. And the evidence suggests that we're approaching a tipping point where the cover-up can no longer be maintained. Too many people have seen too much. Too many witnesses have come forward. Too many researchers have documented too much proof. The underground civilizations themselves seem to be preparing for some kind of revelation, some kind of change in the relationship between surface and subterranean societies. And when that change comes, when the truth about underground civilizations finally becomes undeniable, it will transform everything we think we know about human history, about our place in the world, about the future of our species. The question is, are we ready for that transformation? Are we prepared to learn that we're not the masters of our own planet, Are we willing to accept that we've been living in a carefully constructed illusion, designed to keep us ignorant, while more advanced beings shape our world according to their vision? Because whether we're ready or not, that revelation is coming. The evidence is mounting. The witnesses are speaking out. The underground civilizations are preparing to emerge from the shadows. And when they do, everything changes. But first, let me show you something that will prove beyond any doubt that these underground civilizations aren't just hiding from us. They're actively preparing for something big, something that will fundamentally alter the relationship between surface and subterranean humanity. Because what I'm about to reveal will demonstrate that we're not just dealing with ancient civilizations that have been living underground for thousands of years. We're dealing with a coordinated network of advanced beings who have been systematically preparing for what they call the convergence, the moment when surface and underground civilizations will finally merge into a single unified species. And according to the evidence I've gathered, that convergence is scheduled to happen much sooner than any of us imagined. The documents I'm about to share with you have never been seen by the public. They were leaked to me by a former intelligence analyst who worked for what he called the Integration Protocol, a classified program that supposedly doesn't exist. According to these documents, underground civilizations have been conducting what they term surface readiness assessments for the past 50 years, systematically evaluating whether surface humanity is prepared for what they call dimensional integration. These aren't ancient beings hiding in caves. These are highly advanced societies that have been monitoring our technological, social, and psychological development, waiting for us to reach what they consider acceptable levels of readiness for contact. And according to their latest assessments, we're approaching that threshold faster than anyone anticipated. The leaked documents contain detailed psychological profiles of world leaders, technological assessments of our military capabilities, and social stability analyses of major population centers. But what's most disturbing is the timeline they've established. According to these papers, the integration protocol has 3 phases: preparation, introduction, and convergence. We're currently in the final stages of Phase 1. Dr. Michael Harrison was a cognitive psychologist working for the Department of Defense when he was recruited into what his handlers called Project Deep Reach. His job, he was told, was to develop psychological evaluation protocols for personnel assigned to classified underground installations. What he discovered was that he wasn't evaluating military personnel at all. He was helping to assess the psychological readiness of surface humans for contact with underground civilizations. The evaluation protocols Harrison developed weren't designed to screen people for security clearances. They were designed to identify individuals who could psychologically handle learning about the existence of advanced underground societies without suffering complete mental breakdown. The tests measured adaptability, cognitive flexibility, and what the documents called reality anchor stability, essentially how well someone could maintain their sanity when their fundamental assumptions about the world were proven wrong. But here's what really disturbed Harrison. The evaluation results were being shared with entities that weren't part of any government organization he could identify. The test data was being transmitted to facilities that didn't appear on any official military database, analyzed by personnel whose backgrounds couldn't be verified through normal channels. When Harrison tried to trace where his research was going, he discovered that the communication protocols led to underground installations that were supposedly decommissioned decades ago. Facilities that officially didn't exist were apparently still operating, still conducting research, still preparing for something that his superiors refused to explain. Harrison began documenting everything he could access: the psychological profiles, the communication logs, the facility locations, the personnel assignments. What he pieced together was evidence of a massive psychological operation designed to gradually prepare surface humanity for contact with underground civilizations. According to Harrison's research, thousands of people around the world were being subjected to these psychological evaluations without their knowledge. The tests were embedded in routine medical examinations, employment screenings, and even online surveys. The data was being used to create detailed maps of how different populations might react to the revelation that advanced civilizations had been living beneath their feet for millennia. But the most chilling discovery was what they called the integration candidates, individuals who scored highest on the psychological readiness assessments. These people were being quietly recruited for what the documents described as transition roles in the post-convergent society. They were being trained, educated, and positioned in key roles where they could help manage the social and economic disruption that would inevitably follow public disclosure. Harrison tried to warn people. He reached out to journalists, to human rights organizations, to congressional representatives. But every attempt to publicize his findings was met with immediate suppression. Articles were killed before publication. Politicians claimed they couldn't comment on classified information. Human rights organizations said they couldn't verify his evidence. And then Harrison himself became the subject of evaluation. He discovered that his own psychological profile had been flagged as potentially disruptive to the integration protocol. His access to classified information was gradually restricted. His security clearance was downgraded. His research assignments were modified to exclude anything related to underground installations. Harrison realized that he was being systematically isolated, cut off from the information he needed to continue his investigation, but he had already learned enough to understand the scope of what was being planned. The psychological evaluations weren't just research. They were preparation for a controlled revelation that would transform human civilization forever. According to the documents Harrison had accessed, the integration protocol was operating on a strict timeline. Phase 1, the preparation stage, involved decades of gradual conditioning to prepare surface humanity for the existence of underground civilizations. This included the systematic introduction of concepts through popular culture, the strategic release of information through disclosure movements, and the psychological evaluation of key population segments. Phase 2, the introduction stage, would involve carefully controlled contact between surface and underground representatives. This wouldn't be a dramatic public announcement, but a gradual process of increasing interaction, starting with government and military officials, and slowly expanding to include civilian populations. Phase 3, the convergent stage, would involve the full integration of surface and underground societies into a unified civilization. This would require massive social, economic, and political restructuring, guided by individuals who had been identified and trained during the earlier phases. Harrison's research suggested that we're currently approaching the transition from Phase 1 to Phase 2. The psychological evaluations have been completed. The integration candidates have been identified and positioned. The underground civilizations have apparently determined that surface humanity is ready for limited contact. But Harrison discovered something else in those documents, something that made him realize why so much effort had been invested in keeping this information secret. The integration protocol wasn't designed to benefit surface humanity. It was designed to serve the interests of the underground civilizations. According to the leaked documents, the underground societies have been facing resource depletion and population pressures that make it impossible for them to remain hidden much longer. They need access to surface resources, surface territory, and surface labor to maintain their technological civilization. The integration protocol is essentially a plan for the peaceful annexation of surface society by more advanced underground powers. The psychological evaluations weren't designed to help surface humans adapt to contact. They were designed to identify who would be useful in managing the transition and who might pose a threat to underground interests. The integration candidates weren't being prepared to help humanity navigate the challenges of contact. They were being trained to serve as administrators in what would essentially be an underground colonial system. Harrison tried to document all of this, to preserve evidence that could warn people about what was really being planned. But his access was completely revoked before he could gather definitive proof. His research files were classified beyond his clearance level. His contacts in the program stopped responding to his communications. Harrison disappeared in 2019. The official explanation was that he had taken early retirement for health reasons and had moved to a private facility for treatment. But his family insists they never heard from him again. His colleagues report that he seemed increasingly paranoid and unstable in the months before his disappearance, and investigators who tried to verify his claims found that most of the documents he had described couldn't be located in any official database. But Harrison had shared some of his findings with Dr. Rebecca Torres, a sociologist who had been studying the psychological effects of government secrecy on civilian populations. Torres realized that Harrison's research connected with patterns she had been documenting in her own work. Torres had been investigating what she called preparatory conditioning, the way that governments and media organizations sometimes introduce radical concepts to the public gradually, over long periods of time, to reduce psychological resistance when those concepts eventually become reality. Her research showed that over the past several decades, there had been a systematic campaign to familiarize the public with ideas about underground civilizations, advanced ancient technologies, and contact with non-human intelligences. This wasn't happening through official government channels, but through movies, television shows, books, and internet content that consistently presented these concepts as plausible possibilities rather than pure fantasy. According to Torres's analysis, this content wasn't being produced randomly by creative individuals. It was being carefully coordinated to serve specific psychological objectives. The stories, the imagery, the conceptual frameworks were all designed to make the eventual revelation of underground civilizations seem less shocking, more acceptable, more psychologically manageable for mass audiences. Torres documented dozens of examples where movies and television shows seemed to contain remarkably accurate information about underground installations, advanced technologies, and contact protocols that weren't supposed to be public knowledge. It was as if the creators had access to classified information that they were incorporating into their fictional works. But when Torres tried to trace the funding sources for these productions, when she attempted to identify who was providing the information that made these fictional works so remarkably accurate, she encountered the same pattern of suppression that had silenced other researchers. Her funding was cut. Her academic position was terminated. Her research files were seized by federal agents who claimed they contained information that posed a threat to national security. And Torres herself was informed that continuing her investigations could result in charges of espionage. Torres went underground, literally and figuratively. She began working with a network of independent researchers who were investigating similar patterns of suppression and control. What they discovered was evidence that the preparatory conditioning wasn't limited to entertainment media. It was happening through educational institutions, through religious organizations, through scientific publications, through every channel that could be used to shape public opinion and psychological readiness. According to Torres' research, this conditioning campaign has been remarkably successful. Public opinion surveys show that a significant percentage of the population now considers the existence of underground civilizations to be at least plausible. Psychological studies indicate that most people would be able to accept such a revelation without complete mental breakdown. Social stability analyses suggest that the disclosure of underground civilizations wouldn't cause the kind of mass panic that governments have traditionally feared. In other words, Phase 1 of the integration protocol appears to be nearing completion. Surface humanity has been psychologically prepared for the revelation that we're not alone on this planet. The groundwork has been laid for controlled contact between surface and underground civilizations, and the social infrastructure has been established to manage the transition to an integrated society. But Torres discovered something else in her research, something that suggests the timeline for this transition has been accelerated beyond what the original integration protocol documents indicated. Environmental monitoring data from underground installations shows increasing instability in subterranean ecosystems. Resource depletion rates in underground territories are accelerating faster than predicted. Population pressures in underground cities are approaching critical levels. The underground civilizations are running out of time to maintain their secrecy. According to Torres's analysis, what was originally planned as a gradual, carefully controlled process spanning decades has been compressed into a timeline that could see major changes within the next few years. The integration protocol is being accelerated because the underground civilizations can no longer afford to wait for optimal conditions. This acceleration explains the increasing number of leaks about underground installations, the growing willingness of witnesses to come forward despite obvious risks, and the apparent reduction in efforts to suppress information about underground civilizations. It's not that the cover-up is failing, it's that the cover-up is being deliberately relaxed to prepare the public for revelations that are coming sooner than anyone expected. Torres's research suggests that we're not just approaching phase 2 of the integration protocol. We're rapidly approaching phase 3. The underground civilizations are preparing for full disclosure, for open contact, for the complete transformation of human civilization, and they're doing it on an accelerated timeline that gives surface humanity very little time to prepare for the changes that are coming. But here's what really terrifies Torres about this situation. The accelerated timeline means that the psychological and social preparation that was supposed to take decades is being compressed into years or even months. Surface humanity is being pushed toward integration with underground civilizations before we're fully ready, before we understand the implications, before we have time to make informed decisions about our future. The integration candidates who are supposed to help manage this transition are being activated ahead of schedule. Government officials who are supposed to be gradually briefed about underground civilizations are being given crash courses in contact protocols. Military personnel who are supposed to have years of training are being rushed into positions where they'll be expected to work directly with underground representatives. And the general public, which was supposed to be carefully prepared through years of gradual conditioning, is being subjected to an accelerated disclosure process that could overwhelm our psychological and social systems. According to Torres' most recent analysis, we're looking at a situation where the revelation of underground civilizations could happen at any time, possibly without the careful preparation that was originally planned. The underground societies may be forced to reveal themselves due to environmental or resource crises that make continued secrecy impossible. When that happens, when the existence of underground civilizations becomes undeniable, surface humanity will have to adapt to a new reality almost instantly. We'll have to accept that we're not the dominant species on this planet. We'll have to acknowledge that our history, our technology, our social systems have all been influenced by beings we never knew existed. We'll have to negotiate our role in an integrated civilization where we may not be the controlling party. Torres believes that most people will eventually adapt to this new reality. Humans are remarkably resilient, and the psychological conditioning has been more effective than most people realize. But she also warns that the transition period could be extremely chaotic, with massive social, economic, and political disruption that could take decades to resolve. The question is, what can we do to prepare for this transition? How can we maximize our chances of maintaining some degree of autonomy and self-determination in an integrated civilization? How can we ensure that surface humanity's interests are protected during the negotiation process that will determine our future relationship with underground societies? Torres' research suggests that knowledge is our most important asset. The more people who understand what's really happening, the better our chances of navigating this transition successfully. The underground civilizations have been planning this integration for decades, possibly centuries. They understand our psychology, our social systems, our weaknesses and strengths better than we understand ourselves. But they're also dependent on our cooperation. They need surface resources, surface territory, surface labor to maintain their civilization. They can't simply conquer us militarily because that would destroy the very resources they need to access. They have to convince us to accept integration willingly, or at least without catastrophic resistance. That gives us leverage, but only if we understand how to use it, only if we know what they want from us, what they're offering in return, and what the real costs and benefits of integration would be. And that's why it's so important that we continue investigating, continue documenting, continue spreading awareness about what's really happening beneath our feet. Because the more we know about underground civilizations before the revelation occurs, the better positioned we'll be to negotiate favorable terms for surface humanity. The integration protocol was designed to give underground civilizations maximum advantage in the integration process. But knowledge is power, and every person who understands what's really happening becomes a factor that has to be considered in their calculations. The underground civilizations have spent centuries studying us, preparing for this moment. Now it's our turn to study them, to understand their capabilities and limitations, to prepare for negotiations that will determine the future of our species. Because make no mistake, we're approaching the most important moment in human history. The decisions that are made in the coming years will determine whether surface humanity maintains any meaningful independence in the integrated civilization that's being planned, or whether we become a subordinate species in a world controlled by beings who have been manipulating us from the shadows for millennia. The choice is ours, but only if we're informed enough to make it wisely. Only if we understand what we're really choosing between. Only if we're prepared for the revelation that's coming, whether we're ready or not. The underground civilizations are counting on our ignorance, our psychological unpreparedness, our lack of unity to give them maximum advantage in the integration process. But every person who learns the truth, who spreads awareness, who prepares for what's coming, shifts the balance of power just a little bit more in favor of surface humanity. We may not be able to prevent the integration that's being planned, but we can influence how it happens, what terms are negotiated, and what role surface humanity plays in the civilization that emerges from this process. The question is, are you ready to be part of that influence? Are you prepared to learn uncomfortable truths in service of a more favorable outcome for our species? Are you willing to help prepare other people for revelations that could change everything? Because the clock is ticking, the integration protocol is moving forward on an accelerated timeline, and the window of opportunity for surface humanity to prepare for what's coming is closing faster than most people realize. What I'm about to show you next will prove that this isn't just speculation or conspiracy theory. This is documented reality, supported by evidence that's been hidden from the public for decades. We're going to examine physical proof that underground civilizations are actively preparing for surface integration. We're going to see leaked footage from underground installations that shows exactly what they're planning. And we're going to hear testimonies from people who have been directly involved in the integration protocol, people who understand exactly what's at stake and what's coming. But I have to warn you one final time. The evidence you're about to see will change everything you believe about human civilization, about our future, about our place in the world. Once you understand the full scope of what's being planned, there's no going back to the comfortable ignorance that most people live in. You'll become part of a small but growing community of people who know the truth about what's happening beneath our feet. You'll carry the burden of knowledge that most people aren't ready to accept. And you'll have to decide what you're going to do with that knowledge, how you're going to use it to help prepare humanity for the most significant transition in our species' history. The underground civilizations are emerging from the shadows. The integration protocol is entering its final phases, and the future of surface humanity hangs in the balance. The question is, are you ready to help tip that balance in our favor? The answer to that question may determine whether our species survives the coming convergence as free beings, or whether we become permanent subjects in a civilization we never chose to join. Let me show you something that will chill you to your very core. In 2021, a team of geologists conducting routine seismic surveys in the Appalachian Mountains detected what they initially thought were natural cave formations extending deep beneath the surface. But when they analyzed the acoustic signatures more carefully, they realized they weren't looking at random geological structures. They were looking at artificially constructed chambers, perfectly symmetrical, extending in geometric patterns that covered hundreds of square miles beneath some of America's most populated regions. Dr. Jennifer Walsh was the lead geologist on that survey team. She had spent 15 years mapping underground formations, and she had never seen anything like what those seismic readings revealed. The chambers weren't just large, they were massive. Some of them appeared to be the size of aircraft hangars, connected by tunnel networks that followed precise mathematical relationships, rather than the random patterns you'd expect from natural cave systems. But what really disturbed Dr. Walsh was the acoustic analysis. When they bounced sound waves off these underground structures, the echoes came back in patterns that suggested the chambers weren't empty. They contained objects, machinery, possibly even moving elements that created distinctive acoustic signatures. It was as if they were looking at an active underground city, complete with infrastructure and equipment that was currently operational. Dr. Walsh tried to get authorization for direct exploration of these formations. She submitted requests to the U.S. Geological Survey, to the Department of the Interior, to every relevant federal agency she could identify. The response was always the same: access denied for reasons of national security. The formations were classified as sensitive geological areas that posed potential safety risks to exploration teams. But Dr. Walsh wasn't satisfied with those explanations. She began conducting her own research, using publicly available seismic data to map the extent of these underground formations. What she discovered was a network that extended far beyond the Appalachian region, connecting underground structures beneath major population centers across the eastern United States. The patterns were too precise to be natural, too extensive to be explained by known human construction projects. According to her calculations, the excavation of these formations would have required moving billions of tons of earth and rock using construction techniques that could operate hundreds of feet below the surface without leaving any trace of the construction process on the surface itself. Dr. Walsh presented her findings at a geological conference in Denver, expecting to generate scientific interest in what appeared to be the discovery of previously unknown underground infrastructure. Instead, she found herself confronted by federal agents who informed her that her research involved classified information that posed a threat to national security. Her presentation materials were confiscated. Her research data was classified beyond her security clearance. Her access to federal geological databases was revoked, and she was informed that discussing her findings publicly could result in prosecution under the Espionage Act. But Dr. Walsh had already shared her data with colleagues who continued the research after she was silenced. And what they discovered was evidence that similar underground formations exist beneath major population centers around the world, all following the same geometric patterns, all showing the same acoustic signatures that suggest active habitation. Dr. Marcus Chen, a structural engineer at MIT, obtained copies of Dr. Walsh's seismic data through unofficial channels. His analysis confirmed that the underground formations weren't natural geological features, they were constructed spaces, built according to engineering principles that were far more advanced than anything currently available to surface construction technology. According to Dr. Chen's calculations, the structural integrity of these underground formations required materials and construction techniques that could withstand enormous pressure while maintaining perfect geometric precision across vast distances. The engineering knowledge required for such construction was decades, possibly centuries, ahead of current surface capabilities. But Dr. Chen discovered something else in the data that was even more disturbing. The acoustic signatures weren't just evidence of habitation, they were evidence of expansion. The underground formations were growing, extending their networks, adding new chambers and tunnel systems at a rate that suggested massive construction projects were currently underway. Dr. Chen tried to model the construction timeline based on the acoustic evidence. His calculations suggested that the current expansion rate would result in underground networks that could house millions of people within the next decade. These weren't ancient ruins being slowly excavated. These were active construction projects preparing for massive population increases in underground territories. When Dr. Chen attempted to publish his analysis, he encountered the same pattern of suppression that had silenced Dr. Walsh. His research was classified. His access to the data was revoked. His academic position was terminated due to what his department called budget constraints, despite the fact that his research had been fully funded through external grants. But Dr. Chen had already reached out to international colleagues who were conducting similar research in other countries. And what they told him painted a picture of global underground expansion that defied every assumption about hidden civilizations simply trying to remain hidden. Dr. Elena Petrov, a geophysicist at Moscow State University, had been tracking similar underground formations beneath major Russian cities. Her data showed the same geometric patterns, the same acoustic signatures, the same evidence of active expansion that Dr. Chen had documented in the United States. Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka in Japan had detected identical formations beneath Tokyo, Osaka, and other major population centers. Dr. Klaus Weber in Germany had found evidence of extensive underground networks beneath Berlin, Hamburg, and Frankfurt. Dr. Marie Dubois in France had documented similar structures beneath Paris, Lyon, and Marseille. In every case, the researchers encountered the same pattern of official suppression when they tried to investigate further. Their access to data was restricted. Their research was classified. Their findings were dismissed as misinterpretation of natural geological phenomena. But when these researchers began sharing information through unofficial channels, when they started comparing their data across national boundaries, they realized they were looking at evidence of a coordinated global construction project that was operating simultaneously across multiple continents. The underground formations weren't isolated structures built by separate groups. They were components of an integrated network that connected underground territories across vast distances, possibly across entire continents. The construction was being carried out according to a unified plan that required coordination on a scale that no surface organization could achieve. Dr. Petrov managed to conduct one unauthorized survey before her research was shut down. Using portable seismic equipment, she mapped a section of the underground network beneath Moscow in greater detail than any previous study. What she found was evidence that the underground formations extended far deeper than anyone had imagined. The network had multiple levels, with the deepest chambers located more than a mile beneath the surface. Each level appeared to serve different functions, with some areas showing acoustic signatures consistent with residential spaces, others suggesting industrial or manufacturing facilities, and still others indicating what appeared to be transportation hubs connected to high-speed tunnel systems. But most disturbing of all, Dr. Petrov's detailed survey revealed that the deepest levels of the network were connected to geothermal energy sources that could provide virtually unlimited power to underground populations. The engineering required to tap into these energy sources and distribute power throughout the underground network represented technological capabilities that were far beyond anything available to surface civilization. Dr. Petrov's unauthorized survey was detected by Russian security services within hours of its completion. Her equipment was confiscated. Her research files were seized. She was arrested on charges of conducting unauthorized geological surveys in sensitive security areas. Dr. Petrov disappeared while in government custody. The official explanation was that she had been transferred to a different facility for extended questioning about her research activities, but her colleagues report that she has not been seen or heard from since her arrest, and Russian authorities refuse to provide any information about her current status or location. Before her disappearance, Dr. Petrov managed to transmit some of her survey data to international colleagues through encrypted channels. That data provided the missing piece in a puzzle that researchers had been trying to solve for years. The underground networks weren't just connected within individual countries. They were connected between countries, forming a global infrastructure that could support massive populations and industrial activities completely independent of surface civilization. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a systems analyst who had been working with the International Research Group, used Dr. Petrov's data to create computer models of the global underground network. Her analysis suggested that the complete system could house over 500 million people, with industrial capacity that could support technological development far beyond current surface capabilities. But Dr. Martinez's models revealed something even more significant. The expansion rate of the underground network wasn't random. It was following a precise timeline that appeared to be building toward a specific completion date. Based on the current construction rate, the network would reach full capacity within the next 5 to 7 years. Dr. Martinez realized that she was looking at evidence of preparation for mass migration from surface to underground territories. The underground civilizations weren't just expanding their existing populations. They were preparing to accommodate massive numbers of new residents, possibly including surface humans who would be relocated to underground territories as part of the integration process. When Dr. Martinez tried to share her analysis with government agencies, she encountered the same pattern of suppression that had silenced other researchers. But she had learned from their experiences. Before presenting her findings officially, she distributed copies of her research to dozens of independent investigators around the world. Dr. Martinez's research sparked a new phase of underground investigation that governments couldn't completely suppress. Too many people had access to the data. Too many researchers were conducting parallel studies. Too many witnesses were coming forward with corroborating evidence. What emerged from this distributed research effort was a comprehensive picture of underground civilizations that were actively preparing for the largest population transfer in human history. The expansion wasn't just about housing existing underground populations. It was about creating infrastructure that could support the complete relocation of surface civilization to underground territories. The timeline suggested that this relocation would begin within the next decade, possibly much sooner, if environmental or political crises on the surface accelerated the schedule. The underground civilizations had apparently determined that surface civilization was no longer sustainable in its current form, and they were preparing to offer underground relocation as the solution to humanity's problems. But Dr. Martinez's analysis revealed that this wouldn't be voluntary relocation. The infrastructure being constructed wasn't designed to give surface humans choices about where to live or how to organize their societies. It was designed to accommodate predetermined population distributions in predetermined locations according to predetermined social structures. The underground civilizations weren't preparing to share their territories with surface humans as equals. They were preparing to relocate surface populations to underground territories where they could be more easily controlled, monitored, and managed according to underground priorities and preferences. Dr. Martinez documented evidence that the relocation would be presented as a humanitarian rescue operation, saving surface humanity from environmental collapse, resource depletion, or social chaos. But the underlying reality would be the absorption of surface civilization into underground territories where the existing underground inhabitants would maintain permanent dominance over the relocated surface populations. This wasn't integration between equals. This was a carefully planned annexation of surface humanity by underground civilizations that had been preparing for this moment for decades, possibly centuries. Dr. Martinez tried to warn people about what the evidence suggested. She reached out to journalists, to politicians, to human rights organizations, to anyone who might be able to publicize the implications of what she had discovered. But her warnings were dismissed as conspiracy theories, as misinterpretation of ambiguous data, as the paranoid fantasies of someone who had spent too much time studying underground formations. Meanwhile, the expansion continued. The construction accelerated, the timeline compressed, and the window of opportunity for surface humanity to prepare for what was coming grew smaller every day. Dr. Martinez realized that traditional channels of communication weren't going to be effective. The suppression was too comprehensive, the dismissal too systematic. She needed to find ways to reach people directly, to share information that couldn't be filtered through official channels or mainstream media organizations. She began working with networks of independent researchers, citizen journalists, and alternative media platforms that were willing to examine evidence that mainstream institutions refused to consider. Through these channels, her research reached thousands of people who began conducting their own investigations, looking for evidence of underground expansion in their own regions. What they found was confirmation that the underground construction wasn't limited to the major formations that Dr. Martinez and her colleagues had documented. It was happening everywhere, in smaller installations beneath suburban communities, in networks beneath rural areas, in facilities beneath industrial and commercial centers that were being expanded far beyond their official purposes. The scope of the construction was staggering. Millions of people were working on underground projects around the world, most of them believing they were involved in conventional construction, mining, or infrastructure development. But when independent investigators began mapping these projects, they realized that the separate installations were all components of the same global network. Surface humanity was living on top of the largest construction project in history, a project that was preparing underground territories for populations that numbered in the hundreds of millions. And almost no one on the surface knew it was happening. The few people who discovered the truth and tried to warn others found themselves facing the same pattern of suppression, intimidation, and elimination that had silenced researchers for decades. But the scale of the construction had grown too large to hide completely. Too many people were involved. Too much evidence was accumulating. Too many witnesses were coming forward. The underground civilizations were approaching a point where they would have to choose between abandoning their secrecy or accelerating their timeline for integration. And all the evidence suggested they were choosing acceleration. Dr. Martinez's most recent analysis indicated that the underground networks would reach critical capacity within the next 2 to 3 years, not the 5 to 7 years she had originally calculated. The construction was being completed ahead of schedule, possibly because environmental or social conditions on the surface were deteriorating faster than the underground civilizations had anticipated. This accelerated timeline meant that the integration process would begin much sooner than anyone had expected. Surface humanity would have very little time to prepare for revelations that would fundamentally change our understanding of the world and our place in it. But it also meant that the window of opportunity for surface preparation was closing rapidly. Every month that passed without widespread awareness of what was being planned was a month lost in preparing for negotiations that would determine the future of our species. Dr. Martinez's final report, distributed through encrypted channels to researchers around the world, contained a warning that should terrify anyone who understands its implications. The underground civilizations were no longer planning for gradual integration over decades. They were preparing for rapid absorption of surface populations within years, possibly months. The psychological conditioning that was supposed to prepare surface humanity for this transition was being compressed into an impossibly short time frame. The social and economic preparation that was supposed to ease the disruption was being abandoned in favor of crisis management protocols that assumed massive chaos and disorder during the transition period. Surface humanity was running out of time to influence how this integration would happen, what terms would be negotiated, and what role we would play in the civilization that emerged from this process. The underground civilizations had apparently concluded that surface conditions were deteriorating too rapidly to allow for the gradual approach they had originally planned. They were shifting to emergency protocols that prioritized speed over preparation. control over cooperation, efficiency over consent. Dr. Martinez's research suggested that we were looking at a situation where the revelation of underground civilizations could happen at any time, followed immediately by offers of underground relocation that would be difficult to refuse given the environmental and social crises that were simultaneously developing on the surface. These wouldn't be genuine offers. They would be ultimatums disguised as humanitarian assistance. Surface populations would be presented with choices between accepting underground relocation or facing catastrophic conditions on the surface that were at least partially engineered to make the underground option seem like the only reasonable alternative. The integration that had been planned as a gradual process of mutual adaptation was being replaced by a rapid absorption that would give surface humanity little opportunity to negotiate favorable terms or maintain meaningful independence. But Dr. Martinez's research also revealed something that the underground civilizations might not have fully considered. The accelerated timeline created vulnerabilities in their planning that hadn't existed when they were operating on a longer schedule. The rapid construction had required the involvement of massive numbers of surface contractors and workers who were beginning to understand that they weren't working on conventional projects. The compressed psychological preparation was creating awareness among surface populations faster than the underground civilizations could control it. The emergency protocols were generating evidence that was harder to suppress than the gradual approach had been. In their rush to complete the integration process, the underground civilizations were exposing themselves to discovery and resistance that their original timeline would have avoided. They were creating opportunities for surface humanity to understand what was being planned and to organize resistance or alternative approaches. Dr. Martinez's final analysis suggested that the next few years would be critical in determining whether surface humanity could take advantage of these opportunities or whether the underground civilizations would complete their absorption of surface populations before effective resistance could be organized. The key factor would be awareness. The more people who understood what was really happening, the more difficult it would be for the underground civilizations to complete their plans without significant opposition. Every person who learned the truth became a potential focal point for resistance, a source of information for others, a disruption in the carefully orchestrated process that the underground civilizations had been planning for decades. But awareness alone wouldn't be enough. Surface humanity would need to organize, to develop alternative plans, to create systems that could operate independently of the infrastructure that the underground civilizations were preparing to control. The underground civilizations had spent centuries studying surface humanity, understanding our weaknesses, developing strategies to exploit our psychological and social vulnerabilities. But they had also become dependent on our cooperation, our resources, our labor to maintain their own civilization. That dependence created leverage that surface humanity could use, but only if we understood how to organize effectively, how to coordinate resistance across the global networks that the underground civilizations had been using to coordinate their own activities. The next phase of this investigation would require moving beyond documentation and analysis into active preparation for the confrontation that was coming, whether surface humanity was ready for it or not. Because the underground civilizations were emerging from the shadows, and they were bringing with them plans that would transform human civilization forever. The question was whether surface humanity would be passive participants in that transformation, or whether we would find ways to influence the outcome in favor of our own interests and our own vision of what human civilization should become. Time was running out to answer that question. But for those who were willing to face the truth, willing to prepare for what was coming, willing to organize resistance to plans that had been made without our consent, there was still hope that surface humanity could maintain some degree of control over our own destiny. The underground civilizations had power, technology, and centuries of planning on their side. But surface humanity had numbers, diversity, and the advantage of fighting for our own survival on our own territory. The battle for the future of human civilization was about to begin, and the outcome would depend on how many people were willing to wake up to the truth before it was too late to do anything about it. The evidence is mounting faster than anyone anticipated. What I'm about to show you represents the culmination of 15 years of investigation, thousands of hours of research, and testimonies from sources who risked everything to get this information to the surface. This isn't speculation anymore. This isn't theory. This is documented proof that we are living through the final stages of the most significant transformation in human history. In March of 2023, something happened that changed everything. A whistleblower from within the integration protocol made contact with our research network. This individual, who we can only identify as Deep Source for obvious security reasons, had been working at the highest levels of the underground coordination system for over a decade. What they revealed will shake you to your core. According to Deep Source, the integration protocol isn't just a plan, it's an active operation that entered its final phase in January of 2023. The underground civilizations have moved beyond preparation and monitoring. They are now actively implementing the infrastructure necessary for what they call surface transition events, coordinated crises designed to make underground relocation appear to be the only viable option for surface populations. Deep Source provided us with internal documents that had never been seen outside the underground command structure. These documents, written in a combination of languages including symbols that don't appear in any surface linguistic database, detail specific timelines, population targets, and implementation strategies for the forced integration of surface humanity into underground territories. The documents reveal that what we've been experiencing as separate, unrelated global crises, environmental disasters, economic instability, social unrest, technological disruptions, are actually coordinated elements of a systematic destabilization campaign designed to prepare surface populations for rescue by underground civilizations. But here's what really terrified Deep Source enough to risk their life by coming forward. The integration isn't designed to save surface humanity. It's designed to harvest us. According to the leaked documents, surface humans possess certain biological and psychological characteristics that underground civilizations have been unable to replicate in their own populations. Our genetic diversity, our adaptability to surface conditions, our capacity for creative problem-solving under stress. These are resources that the underground civilizations need to maintain their own technological advancement and population stability. The integration protocol isn't about helping surface humanity survive environmental collapse. It's about acquiring the human resources that underground civilizations need to prevent their own civilization from stagnating and declining. We're not being rescued, we're being collected. Deep Source described underground facilities that contain what can only be called human breeding programs, designed to maintain and enhance the genetic characteristics that underground civilizations find valuable while eliminating the traits they consider problematic. Surface humans who undergo integration aren't just relocated to underground territories. They're systematically modified, controlled, and utilized according to underground priorities that have nothing to do with human welfare or dignity. The psychological conditioning that we documented earlier isn't designed to help surface humans adapt to underground life. It's designed to make us more compliant, more manageable, more useful as resources in underground industrial and research programs that serve underground interests exclusively. But Deep Source revealed something else that changes everything we thought we understood about this situation. The underground civilizations aren't unified. They're not operating according to a single coordinated plan. There are multiple underground factions with competing interests, different approaches to surface integration, and conflicting visions of what the post-integration world should look like. Some underground factions favor complete absorption of surface populations with minimal preservation of surface culture or autonomy. Others support a more gradual integration that would maintain surface populations as subordinate but semi-independent communities. Still others advocate for selective harvesting of specific surface populations while leaving the majority to face surface conditions without assistance. These factional differences have created opportunities that surface humanity could potentially exploit, but only if we understand the dynamics involved and act quickly enough to influence the outcome before one faction achieves dominance over the others. According to Deep Source, the faction that favors complete absorption has been gaining influence within the underground coordination system, partly because surface conditions are deteriorating faster than other factions anticipated. The environmental and social crises that were supposed to develop gradually over decades are manifesting within years, forcing underground civilizations to accelerate their timeline regardless of their preferred approach. This acceleration has created internal conflicts within underground society that could potentially be leveraged by surface resistance movements, but only if those movements can organize effectively and quickly enough to take advantage of the opportunities that these conflicts create. Deep Source provided us with detailed information about the communication systems that underground factions use to coordinate their activities. These systems operate on frequencies and through protocols that surface technology can access, but only with specific equipment and knowledge that has never been available to surface populations. But here's where things get really interesting. Deep Source didn't just provide information, they provided access codes. For the first time in human history, surface researchers have been able to monitor underground communications in real time. What we've discovered through this monitoring will terrify you, but it will also give you hope, because it reveals weaknesses in underground planning that surface humanity can exploit. The underground factions are struggling with resource limitations that are more severe than they've admitted to surface governments. The environmental degradation that's affecting surface conditions is also impacting underground territories, forcing underground civilizations to compete for resources that are becoming increasingly scarce. Some underground installations are experiencing critical failures in their life support systems. Others are dealing with population pressures that exceed their designed capacity. Still others are facing technological breakdowns that their existing knowledge can't repair without access to surface resources and expertise. The underground civilizations need surface cooperation, not just for convenience, but for survival. Their own society is facing crises that make integration with surface populations a necessity rather than a choice. They can't simply conquer us militarily because they need our cooperation to solve problems that their own technology and social systems haven't been able to address. This dependence creates leverage that surface humanity can use, but only if we organize effectively and act before the underground civilizations complete their current expansion projects. Once the new underground infrastructure is fully operational, their dependence on surface cooperation will be significantly reduced. The monitoring of underground communications has revealed that the integration protocol timeline has been compressed from years to months. The underground factions have agreed to accelerate their surface transition events because their own internal crises are reaching critical points faster than they anticipated. What this means is that the systematic destabilization of surface conditions is going to intensify dramatically over the next 6 to 12 months. We're going to see environmental disasters, economic collapses, social conflicts, and technological disruptions that will make current global problems seem manageable by comparison. These events will be presented as natural consequences of surface civilization's unsustainable practices, but they will actually be engineered crises designed to make underground relocation appear to be the only rational option for surface populations who want to survive. The underground factions have already begun implementing what they call cascade protocols, systematic disruptions of surface infrastructure that create chain reactions of failure across multiple systems simultaneously. Power grids, communication networks, transportation systems, financial institutions, food distribution chains. All of these are being targeted for coordinated disruption that will create conditions of chaos and desperation among surface populations. But the monitoring has also revealed something that gives me hope. The underground civilizations are afraid of us. Their internal communications show genuine concern about surface humanity's capacity for unpredictable resistance, creative problem-solving, and rapid adaptation to changing conditions. They've spent centuries studying us, but they still don't fully understand how surface humans will respond when we realize what's really being done to us. Their psychological profiles of surface populations are based on observations of humans living under normal conditions, with stable social systems and predictable resource availability. They don't have reliable data about how surface humans behave when we understand that our survival depends on resistance to overwhelming odds. The underground civilizations have technological advantages and centuries of planning on their side, but they've never faced organized resistance from surface populations who understand their true intentions. They're entering unknown territory where their technological superiority might not be sufficient to overcome human determination and ingenuity. Deep Source revealed that some underground factions are actually advocating for negotiated settlement with surface resistance movements rather than attempting forced integration. These factions recognize that cooperation with willing surface partners would be more effective than managing unwilling surface populations through coercion and control. This creates opportunities for surface humanity to negotiate from positions of strength rather than simply accepting whatever terms the underground civilizations choose to offer. But those opportunities will only exist if surface resistance movements can organize quickly enough and effectively enough to demonstrate that forced integration would be more costly than negotiated cooperation. The key is unity. The underground civilizations have been successful partly because surface humanity has never been able to organize coordinated resistance across national, cultural, and ideological boundaries. We've been divided by the very differences that make us valuable to underground civilizations: our diversity, our independence, our tendency to compete rather than cooperate. But those same characteristics could become strengths if we can learn to coordinate our efforts while maintaining our diversity. The underground civilizations are unified but inflexible. Surface humanity is divided but adaptable. If we can combine coordination with adaptability, we could potentially outmaneuver opponents who have superior technology but less capacity for creative response to unexpected challenges. Deep Source provided us with detailed intelligence about underground installation locations, communication protocols, resource distribution networks, and operational procedures that could be targeted by surface resistance movements. But they also warned us that time is running out faster than anyone anticipated. The cascade protocols are already being implemented. The surface transition events are being activated. The infrastructure for mass relocation is nearing completion. The window of opportunity for organized resistance is measured in months, not years. But here's what gives me the most hope. You're listening to this. You're part of a growing network of people who understand what's really happening, who refuse to accept the official explanations, who are willing to face uncomfortable truths in order to prepare for what's coming. Every person who understands this information becomes a node in a resistance network that the underground civilizations didn't plan for and don't know how to counter. Every person who shares this knowledge multiplies our capacity to organize effective resistance. Every person who prepares for what's coming reduces the effectiveness of the psychological manipulation that the integration protocol depends on. The underground civilizations have been planning this for centuries, but they've been planning for a surface humanity that doesn't know what's coming. They haven't planned for a surface humanity that understands their intentions, recognizes their tactics, and organizes resistance before the integration process begins. We have advantages they don't expect us to have. We have knowledge they thought we'd never acquire. We have unity they believed we'd never achieve. And we have determination they can't quantify or predict. The battle for the future of human civilization is no longer approaching. It's here. It's happening right now, and the outcome will be determined by how many people wake up to the truth before it's too late to act on it. But this isn't just about resistance. It's about what comes after. Because even if we successfully resist forced integration, we still have to solve the problems that made integration seem necessary in the first place. We still have to address environmental degradation, resource depletion, social inequality, and technological disruption that threatens surface civilizations' sustainability. The underground civilizations have solutions to these problems, but their solutions involve subordinating surface humanity to underground control. We need to develop our own solutions that preserve human freedom and dignity while addressing the real challenges that threaten our survival. This is the ultimate test of human ingenuity and determination. Can we solve problems that have stumped us for decades when our survival depends on finding answers? Can we cooperate across differences that have divided us for centuries when unity becomes a matter of life and death? Can we adapt to challenges that threaten everything we've built when adaptation becomes the only alternative to extinction? I believe we can. I believe that surface humanity has capabilities that even we don't fully understand, capabilities that emerge only when we face existential challenges that require us to transcend our normal limitations. The underground civilizations have studied us for centuries, but they've never seen us when we're fighting for our survival with full knowledge of what we're fighting against. They're about to discover what surface humanity is really capable of when we're united, informed, and determined to preserve our freedom. But that discovery will only happen if enough people understand what's at stake, prepare for what's coming, and commit to resistance before the integration protocol reaches completion. The choice is yours. You can continue living in comfortable ignorance, accepting official explanations, trusting that others will solve these problems for you. Or you can accept the responsibility that comes with knowledge, prepare for the challenges that are coming, and join the resistance movement that represents surface humanity's best hope for maintaining control over our own destiny. The underground civilizations are counting on your ignorance, your passivity, your willingness to accept their solutions rather than developing your own. They're counting on surface humanity to choose security over freedom, comfort over independence, survival over dignity. But every person who chooses knowledge over ignorance, action over passivity, resistance over submission, proves them wrong. Every person who refuses to accept their vision of the future creates possibilities they never planned for. The future of human civilization hangs in the balance. And that balance can be tipped by every individual who decides to stand up, speak out, and fight back against plans that were made without our consent and against our interests. The underground civilizations have been preparing for this moment for centuries. Now it's our turn to prepare. The question is, are you ready to join the most important fight in human history? Because whether you're ready or not, that fight is coming. And the outcome will determine whether surface humanity maintains any meaningful control over our own future, or whether we become permanent subjects in a civilization we never chose to join. The clock is ticking. The integration protocol is moving forward. And the window of opportunity for effective resistance is closing faster than most people realize. But as long as that window remains open, as long as there are people willing to face the truth and act on it, there's still hope that surface humanity can write our own ending to this story. The question is, what ending do you want to write? And what are you willing to do to make sure that ending becomes reality? The choice is yours, but choose quickly, because time is running out and the underground civilizations aren't going to wait for us to make up our minds. The evidence is undeniable. The testimonies are mounting. The underground expansion continues at an unprecedented pace. But as I sit here in my research facility, surrounded by thousands of documents, photographs, and recorded testimonies that paint the most comprehensive picture of subterranean civilization ever assembled, I realize that we've reached a critical juncture in human history. Everything I've shown you tonight represents just the surface of a truth so vast, so profound, that it challenges the very foundation of everything we believe about our world, our history, and our future. The underground civilizations aren't just real. They're not just hiding. They're not just watching. They're actively reshaping the world above our heads. And they're doing it according to a timeline that gives us precious little time to respond. But here's what keeps me awake at night. What drives me to continue this investigation, despite the obvious dangers, despite the threats, despite the systematic efforts to silence anyone who gets too close to the truth. The underground civilizations have made one critical miscalculation. They've underestimated us. They've spent centuries studying surface humanity as specimens in a laboratory, cataloguing our behaviors, mapping our psychological responses, predicting our reactions to various stimuli. But they've never encountered surface humans who know what they're really dealing with. They've never faced organized resistance from people who understand their true intentions. They've never had to adapt their plans to account for surface populations who refuse to play the roles they've been assigned in this cosmic drama. Every person who watches this video, every individual who shares this information, every human being who refuses to accept the official explanations and starts asking their own questions, becomes a variable in their calculations that they never anticipated. We're disrupting their timeline simply by existing, simply by knowing, simply by refusing to remain ignorant. But knowledge without action is worthless. Understanding without preparation is meaningless. Awareness without organization is powerless. The integration protocol depends on surface humanity remaining divided, confused, and reactionary. They need us to respond to their manufactured crises with panic rather than planning, with desperation rather than determination, with submission rather than resistance. But what if we don't give them what they expect? What if surface humanity responds to their revelations with unity instead of chaos? What if we meet their offers of underground salvation with organized alternatives that serve our interests rather than theirs? What if we turn their own timeline against them by preparing faster than they anticipated? The underground civilizations have technology, resources, and centuries of planning on their side. But we have something they've never possessed and can never fully understand. The unpredictable creativity of a species that has survived every catastrophe this planet has thrown at us, not through superior technology or careful planning, but through sheer stubborn refusal to surrender, when surrender seems like the only rational option. We are the descendants of humans who survived ice ages without underground cities, who crossed oceans without advanced navigation systems, who built civilizations from nothing using nothing but determination and ingenuity. We carry in our DNA the legacy of every generation that faced impossible odds and found ways to overcome them. The underground civilizations know our weaknesses because they've been studying them for millennia. But they don't understand our strengths because those strengths only emerge when we're pushed beyond our normal limitations, when survival depends on transcending everything we thought was possible. They're about to discover what surface humanity is really capable of when we're fighting for our freedom with full knowledge of what we're fighting against. And I believe that discovery will change their calculations in ways they never anticipated. But that transformation will only happen if enough people understand what's at stake, prepare for what's coming, and commit to resistance before the integration protocol reaches its final phase. This isn't just about exposing the truth. It's about what we do with that truth once we have it. It's about whether surface humanity chooses to be passive victims of someone else's plan or active architects of our own destiny. The underground civilizations have given us a choice, though they probably don't realize it. We can accept their vision of the future, their timeline, their terms for integration. Or we can develop our own vision, create our own timeline, establish our own terms for how surface and underground civilizations will coexist. But choosing the second option requires something that surface humanity has rarely achieved: genuine cooperation across every boundary that has traditionally divided us. National borders, cultural differences, religious beliefs, political ideologies, economic interests, all of these divisions become irrelevant when our species' independence is at stake. The underground civilizations are counting on our inability to achieve that level of cooperation. They've structured their entire strategy around the assumption that surface humanity will remain fragmented, competitive, and focused on short-term interests rather than long-term survival. But what if they're wrong? What if the revelation of their existence becomes the catalyst that finally unites surface humanity around a common cause? What if their attempt to manipulate us becomes the foundation for the greatest collaborative effort in human history? I've spent 15 years documenting the evidence of underground civilizations, but I've also spent those years building networks of researchers, investigators, and truth seekers who represent every continent, every culture, every background you can imagine. What I've discovered is that the desire for truth, the commitment to freedom, and the determination to preserve human dignity transcend every difference that supposedly divides us. The people who've risked everything to bring this information to light aren't motivated by nationality or ideology or personal gain. They're motivated by the simple understanding that some truths are too important to remain hidden, regardless of the consequences of revealing them. That same motivation exists in millions of people around the world who are ready to act on this information once they understand what it means and what it requires of them. The underground civilizations have created the conditions for their own resistance by forcing surface humanity to choose between freedom and security, between independence and survival, between dignity and comfort. Those are choices that bring out the best in human nature, not the worst. They're choices that create heroes, not victims. They're choices that forge unity, not division. The next phase of this investigation will move beyond documentation into preparation, beyond exposure into organization, beyond awareness into action. Because the time for simply gathering evidence has passed. The time for responding to that evidence has arrived. The underground civilizations have revealed their timeline. Now it's our turn to establish ours. They've shown us their capabilities. Now we need to discover ours. They've demonstrated their unity. Now we need to achieve ours. But this won't happen automatically. It won't happen through wishful thinking or passive hoping. It will only happen through deliberate, coordinated effort by people who understand what's at stake and commit to doing whatever is necessary to preserve surface humanity's right to determine our own future. The evidence I've presented tonight is just the beginning. The real work starts when you turn off this video and decide what you're going to do with the knowledge you've gained. The real test begins when you choose between comfortable ignorance and uncomfortable action, between individual safety and collective responsibility, between accepting someone else's plan for your future and fighting to create your own. The underground civilizations have been planning this moment for centuries. They've prepared for every contingency they could imagine. But they haven't prepared for the one thing they can't control: the human spirit, when it's fully awakened to the truth and determined to act on it. That spirit has carried our species through every crisis we've ever faced. It's the reason we're still here, despite wars, plagues, natural disasters, and countless other challenges that should have destroyed us. And it's the reason we'll still be here long after the integration protocol becomes nothing more than a failed attempt to control a species that refuses to be controlled. But awakening that spirit, organizing that resistance, and achieving that victory requires every person who understands this truth to become part of the solution. It requires you to move beyond being a passive observer of these events and become an active participant in shaping their outcome. The choice is yours. The time is now. The future of human civilization hangs in the balance, and that balance can be tipped by every individual who decides to stand up, speak out, and fight back against plans that were made without our consent and against our interests. The underground civilizations are emerging from the shadows, whether we're ready or not. The question is, when they emerge, will they find a surface humanity that's prepared to meet them as equals? Or will they find a species that's already surrendered before the real negotiations even begin? The answer to that question depends on you. It depends on what you do with this information. It depends on whether you choose to be part of the resistance or part of the submission. Choose wisely, choose quickly, and choose with the understanding that your decision will echo through history, shaping the story that future generations will tell about this moment when surface humanity faced its greatest challenge and discovered what we were truly capable of achieving. The underground civilizations have been writing our story for us for far too long. Now it's time for us to take back the pen and write our own ending. And I believe that ending will be far more extraordinary than anything they ever planned for us. Because we are surface humanity. We are the descendants of survivors. We are the inheritors of every dream, every hope, every act of defiance that has ever challenged the powerful and fought for the powerless. We are not going quietly into their underground night. We are going to light our own fires, forge our own path, and create our own future. The question is, are you ready to join us? Because the revolution starts now, and it starts with you.